Hi class, welcome to the video Understanding the Direct Instruction Assignment. This is your next major assignment in the course. It's worth 15% of your grade and it's due on April 23rd. Everything we're going to discuss, the instructions, the link to submit, and more, may be found under Major Assignments. And if you click on Major Assignments on the left part of the toolbar, you'll see partway down the page the folder for the direct instruction lesson. If you go into that folder, you'll see the instructions and the template which you complete and turn in. It also contains the grading rubric. The second thing you'll see is the link to submit once you have completed your work and saved your file. And finally, you'll see the link to this video. Let's open the instructions and take a look at how to complete this assignment. First of all, this assignment may be submitted up to a week late with a 10% point penalty, and it may be revised for up to a week after it's graded. The purpose of this assignment is to teach you how to do a direct instruction lesson. We've been learning about direct instruction in one of the modules, and now you'll put it to use. So you're going to plan a direct instruction lesson and teach it to one age-appropriate student. Your lesson should be about something you know a lot about. It doesn't have to be about something academic, but it may be. You need to be able to teach it in about 20 minutes or less. You're going to follow the steps that we are learning in class, the I do, we do, you do. So be sure to complete that direct instruction module before you do this lesson. In the past, students have taught lessons such as how to use a mnemonic to remember something, how to study for tests, how to research something on the internet, how to assess a website's credibility, the words to a particular song, the words to a particular poem, movements to a dance, how to say something in sign language, how to draw something, phrases in another language, how to stretch, how to use guided relaxation, breathing techniques, yoga, and more. So how do you begin? First of all, think of something you would like to teach and plan the lesson. Later, we're going to see a table with columns. The last two columns of the table are the part that you complete in this step. Then you're going to practice the lesson before you teach it. Select someone age appropriate to be the student. This could be a relative, a friend's child, or student. Make sure if you use a student that you clear it with the parent before doing the lesson. Teach the lesson. After the lesson, ask the student questions in part 2 and record their responses. This will be a part of your grade. Finally, there are some reflection questions in part 2 that ask you to think about what you've learned. Save your template and submit it to the link in the folder. Let's look at the table. This is the table you will use to plan your lesson. The table breaks out the steps to a direct instruction lesson, so you have to plan it before you give the lesson. The first step is to introduce the activity and engage the students. So normally at this stage, you're trying to interest the students in the lesson. There are a couple of different ways to do this. You could connect it to something in their lives. For example, if you're teaching them about the stock market, you could talk about, wouldn't it be great to have a way to earn real money? Um, you could also do a demonstration. For example, if you're teaching a science lesson, you could bring in some materials and do a little demonstration in the class that leads to the topic of the lesson. I've seen teachers dressed up as historical characters to engage their students. Anything, we call this the hook, anything you can do to pique students' curiosity. In the column that's the next to the last column, describe what you will do in this step. You can do it in general. If there are words you want to say literally to the class, put them in quotation marks. You may do either. You may put the actual words down in quotation marks, or you can describe it. But if you choose to just describe it, make sure you're describing it specifically enough so the reader has a clear understanding of what's going on in this step. The last column is to list any materials you would need in this step. The second step is to state one learning objective. So this is something that you would tell the students in your class that they're going to be learning. For example, today class, you're going to learn why water and oil don't mix. That might be a learning objective. It's important to state the learning objective so that students are clear on the material they're expected to learn, on what exactly should be the outcome at the end of the lesson. The third step is the procedure. What you want students to know. What exact words will you use to teach the skill or content knowledge, or how will you model? So this is the I do portion of the I do, we do, you do. It's important to tell students how to do something directly or to model it for them. For example, if you're a math teacher and you're teaching 2-digit by 2-digit multiplication, you might describe how you would model it with several problems on the board. Step 4 is to provide guided practice. So after you've taught the I do phase, and you judge that students are ready to continue, then you do it with them. Don't just turn them loose to do it. So you do it with them, allowing them to practice with your help. So for example, if you're teaching the 2-digit by 2-digit multiplication problem and you've done that on the board with this, showing the students how to do it, then you might ask students to copy down a problem at their seats and then do it along with them several times, probing for what is the next step, what is the answer here. Once you judge that students can do it competently with your help, then it's time to go to the 5th step, which is independent practice. This is when you turn the students loose to practice on their own. In the example of the math problem, this would be where they work at their desk on the worksheets with the 2-digit by 2-digit multiplication problem, where you go around the room and spot check and stop and provide correction. The 6th step is how will you assess learning? How will you tell that learning has taken place? This should not be you go around and see generally if students are understanding it. If you are asked the question, does Susie know how to do this? How will you know that? Usually this takes the form, rather than classroom discussion, of a quiz, a test, a problem set, a worksheet, a poem, something they have produced or something they're able to do. If you're asking them, for example, to memorize a poem, the proof of the pudding might be, can they say the poem back to you? Yes or no? Number 7, provide closure. This is where you step up at the end and provide closure to the lesson by summarizing the lesson. This is really a summary of the lesson. In conclusion class, we learned today that we can do 2-digit by 2-digit multiplication by first multiplying the ones by the ones, the tens by the ones, etc. After you have completed the template for the table and you have your lesson plan, teach the lesson to a student and then ask these questions of the student. What did you like about the lesson? What went well? Again, this is from the student's perspective. Was anything confusing for you? How could it be improved? Do you feel like you learned what you were supposed to learn? The final part is your own reflection. Who did you teach the lesson to? What age are they? Why did you select this student? You can select an adult, by the way, if your lesson is age appropriate. What went well during the lesson? What did not go well? Why? What changes might you make before you teach the lesson again? And what did you learn about direct instruction from this lesson? One of the most important things we can do as a teacher to improve is to constantly reflect on our instruction. What went well? What didn't go well? What would you change? Here is part of the grading rubric. I encourage students to look at the grading rubric and understand it before they complete the assignment. The first thing I'm going to look at is whether you have an introduction that would motivate the students to learn. This is the hook that I talked about before. Was your learning objective present? And was it kid-friendly? Can kids understand it? Was your procedure valid and detailed enough to have a clear understanding of what was happening in the lesson? Did you provide an I do, that's the procedure? Did you provide guided practice, a we do? And did you provide independent practice, a you do? Was there an assessment of learning such that I could ask you about any student in your class and you would be able to tell me how they did on that lesson? Was closure provided, a summary of the lesson? Did you answer completely the student questions and the reflection questions? And notice that the reflection questions are weighted slightly more heavily than some of the other parts, because one of the things that research tells us is that metacognition is one of the best ways to improve learning. Metacognition, as I've probably said before, is thinking about what you've learned, thinking about your thinking. And we know from decades of research, the more you think and reflect upon what you've learned, what you haven't learned, and what you'd like to know more about, the more ultimately you'll learn. That's it for this assignment. If you have any questions, as usual, feel free to email me.